the people who are criticizing Vladimir Putin, they're talking about that he wasn't that much powerful in the language he has chosen to use to warn the West. And it seems, to me, Vladimir Putin is the voice of sanity. To me, is the voice of sanity. Is each and every reason that we don't have a nuclear war, a World War III in the case of the conflict in Ukraine. But these people have a point in their sort of criticism. And here is what Donald Trump said. That's hugely problematic, in my opinion. Here is what he said.
Decision on whether to supply Tomahawk missiles to Ukraine or sell them to NATO and let them sell them to Ukraine.
Yeah, I've sort of made a decision, pretty much. If you consider, yeah, I think I want to find out what they're doing with them.
Yes.
Where are they sending them? I guess I'd have to ask that question. That war should never have started. Would have never started. Such bad judgment was used there. I think on both sides, by the way. But nobody looks good with the war with Russia and Ukraine. Nobody. It's been a horrible. This week they lost over 7,000 soldiers between the two of them. This is every week they're losing 7,000, 8,000, 5,000.
They have a range of like 1,500 miles or something, so they'd be able to.
No, I know. No, I would ask some questions. I want to see what's. I'm not looking.
He literally says, Scott, he says that he made his decision, sort of made his decision to send Tomahawk missiles to NATO and Ukraine, but he wants to know what they're doing with them first. They're not going to use them for home decoration, purposes. You're taking that.
Well, first of all, can you give me a name of these people who say that Vladimir Putin is weak?
It's not just about a particular person, because I don't want to.
I know who the person is. It's Gilbert Doctorow, and he's full of shit. I'm just going to state it right up front. It's grossly irresponsible what he's saying, and it reflects an absolute zero knowledge and understanding of the reality of Russia. This is a man who sits on his ass in Belgium and watches Russian TV, and then gets on the phone and talks to a handful of disenfranchised Russian elites who are impotent as the day is long, have no connectivity with real power structures in Russia. Vladimir Putin enjoys more than 80% level of support amongst the Russian people. Never in the history of the world has a leader who enjoys that level of support amongst the people been overthrown by a coup. Never. So Doctorow just simply doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. And it's very dangerous for him to say it. And it's very dangerous for people to give it credibility, because it's so far removed from reality. It's not even what it does. First of all, it doesn't move the needle in Russia at all. You think the Russians give a shit what Gilbert Doctorow thinks or says? No, not at all. What it does, though, is empower those people around Donald Trump. And that's why I'm angry. And that's why I'm speaking out the way I am. You see, there are Russophobes in America. Doctorow claims he's not. He's an old school Sovietologist who's been looking at whatever he is. What he isn't is an expert on modern day Russia. What he isn't is an expert on arms control. What he isn't is an expert on war. And apparently he's not an expert on American politics as well. Because if he was, he'd understand that what he's saying feeds the tropes of the Russophobes who currently surround the president of the United States. Why is the president doing what he's doing? There's two reasons. One, he's embarrassed, and that's always problematic. This is a man who said he was going to pick up the phone and stop the war. This is a man who claimed he had a great relationship with his good friend Vladimir Putin, and that once they met and talked, Putin would see the light and do what Donald Trump wanted him to do, which was to bring an end to the war in a way that wasn't going to solve the root causes of the conflict, but make Donald Trump look good in time to get the Nobel Peace Prize. Donald Trump put a lot of political capital into stopping the Ukrainian-Russian conflict, and he failed. He failed because that's not how it operates. That's not what Russia's about. Russia is in an existential conflict that requires them to prevail on terms acceptable to them. Anything less than that in an existential conflict means that Russia doesn't survive. I want to remind people, Gilbert Doctorow included, that the United States currently is sustaining a policy that began in the Biden administration, at least articulated by Lloyd Austin, the Secretary of Defense, in 2022, but actually extends even further back. I mean, we can go back to 2004. Hey, Gil, tell me what it was. The Orange Revolution in Kiev. You studied that one, Gilbert? You understand the role the CIA played in trying to create a regime change in Kiev and why they did that? Are you cognizant of 1991 and what was going on with the CIA and the Banderas? Are you aware of what happened in 2008 when during the reset? Do you actually think it was a diplomatic reset, that the Obama administration was inclined to dramatically rethink its approach to Russia? Or was it just diplomatic cover for ongoing regime change operations? Because the reset was all about keeping Vladimir Putin out and bringing Dmitry Medvedev in. This is a policy that's been ongoing for some time now, and it's promulgated by Russophobes who believe that Russia should be subordinate to the United States. And if Vladimir Putin were to accept peace terms as dictated by Donald Trump, then Russia would be forever subordinated to the United States, subordinated to Europe, and allowing a Ukraine, this fist in the womb of Russia, to exist as a NATO, if not member, at least a de facto member, an ally with a large NATO-trained army equipped with modern NATO weaponry to include long-range strike missiles. Russia will never allow that to happen. And Gilbert should know this. And so should everybody else. But the president's embarrassed. But the other problem, and this is where I have a problem with Gilbert, a big problem. You see, if you actually are going to articulate that Vladimir Putin is vulnerable to a coup, that means that that the West has a chance. Come on, Gil. You look like Jim Carrey in the movie Dumb and Dumber. When he goes after the woman and says, "You go out," and she says, "It's not one, never." He goes, "Is there a 1 in a million chance?" She said, "Maybe 1 in a million." He said, "So you're telling me I have a chance?" And that's what Dr. O sounds like, because what he's saying is that if the West just keeps putting pressure on Russia, there will be a coup. Putin will fall. He's vulnerable. He's weak. There are people inside Moscow that the West can manipulate to bring down Vladimir Putin. This is extraordinarily stupid and dangerous because there are people around Donald Trump who believe this. They think Putin's bluffing. They don't understand the source of Putin's strength, which is he's winning. Hey, Gil, tell me, name one aspect of this war that Putin's losing right now. Just name one. You can't. He's winning everything. Those 7,000 dead that Trump's talking about? The vast majority of them are Ukrainian dead. All right, this is a war of attrition that's what Russia's winning handily. And Putin said in Valdai, all we have to do is keep killing them. Eventually, they're going to run out of manpower. It doesn't matter what kind of equipment the West provides. If you don't have manpower to operate the equipment, you lose. And that's the direction that Russia's heading. And the Ukrainians are in a panic. Europe's in a panic. Everybody's in a panic about this. So now, what do you do about this? Well, Donald Trump said, you can't win the war on the defensive. If you let the other side attack, you're going to lose. So Ukraine has to be able to strike back. That was his big thing. Ukraine has to be able to strike back. But I want to remind Donald Trump, I believe in December, he gave an interview with Time magazine. And in that interview, he criticized the Biden administration's policy of allowing the Ukrainians to use U.S.-provided ATACMS missiles that only have, the ability to go 300-400 miles deep into Russia and to provide intelligence used to target that. And he said, this is grossly irresponsible because it creates instability that could lead to a world war, a nuclear war. And he said, when I'm president, I won't allow that. Heck, members of Congress felt so strongly about this that they put forward a House resolution that would have banned Biden from allowing, by selling ATACMS missiles to Ukraine and ban any support provided by the United States, logistically, communications, intelligence, that would facilitate the targeting of that because it's inherently destabilizing. This is the ATACMS system. And now Donald Trump's saying, no, I'm going to give Tomahawks to Ukraine. Why? What changed? I mean, this is orders of magnitude more dangerous than the ATACMS missiles. What changed? The FBI began tinkering in my system, as they are wont to do. Thanks, FBI. But so this again is a political problem. But the key aspect here is that people believe Russia's bluffing. See, people believe that Russia's weak because, gosh, the West has trampled over red lines over and over and over again. Many of these red lines were created by the West, but others were implied by Russia, saying, if you do this, you're going to make things worse. And then they did it, and Russia apparently didn't do anything in response. But see, that's where Dr. O and the others are just wrong. Russia did everything in response. Russia killed the Ukrainian soldiers. Russia routed the Ukrainian army. Russia's destroying Ukrainian infrastructure. Russia's destroying in the defense industry of Ukraine. Russia's dominating economically. Nothing the West does is having a significant impact on Russia. Gas shortages, maybe in Crimea. Gas prices go up, maybe in Moscow a little bit. But there are no car lines throughout Russia. Talk to the Russians, Gil. Don't watch Russian TV and don't look at pro-Ukrainian Telegram channels. Look at the reality of Russia. And it's just there's no significant impact. Russia has prepared for everything because Putin is a strategic thinker. Rather than watching Russian TV, Gil Doctorow should probably follow the president as he goes around Russia and meets with various governors and various local governing bodies to talk about how they're going to overcome these problems. Read the minutes of the meetings that are held in Moscow between Putin and the Russian government, the various departments and such that talk about, energy, etc. And you'd realize there is a strategic plan here, that nothing has happened that's taking Russia by surprise. Would Russia prefer not to have their refineries getting hit? Absolutely. Who wouldn't? But Russia understands that this is a conflict, and therefore there is a price to be paid. But people say, well, why doesn't Russia respond decisively? How much more decisive do you want Russia to respond? They're slaughtering Ukrainian troops on the battlefield as part of a war of attrition that Russia has adopted as their principal vector for conflict resolution in their favor. They've opted out of the big arrows. They've opted out of a strategic bombing campaign. Why? Why won't they decapitate the Ukrainian leadership? Which is something that all these supposedly, pro-Russian people keep saying. Because then you don't understand Russia. If you're advocating the elimination of the Ukrainian regime, then you don't understand that, Russia today, for instance, when I was there in August, I was invited by the National Unity Club. They're a sort of an adjunct of the Union State. The Union State is a political economic relationship between Russia and Belarus. But the Union State, when they speak of the ideal, they speak of the three sisters. There's a third sister out there. That third sister is Ukraine. The Union State doesn't truly exist until the third sister it comes home. And if you don't understand that Russia treats Ukraine as the third sister, then you don't understand Russia, and you don't understand why Putin's behaving the way he does. Putin's winning this war. He's dominating this war, actually. People need to understand it's not just Russia against Ukraine. It's Russia against the collective West. Russia against the totality of NATO's industrial capability, military industrial capability. He's outproducing the United States and NATO combined by a good factor. They're producing better weapons, better quantities. What do people want Russia to do? Because Russia's winning. Anything outsiders like Dr. O and others are advocating for would take Russia down a completely different path, one that leads inevitably to escalation, and escalation leads to a completely different kind of conflict with outcomes different than the one that Russia's currently seeking. Russia's not seeking to physically destroy NATO, to occupy Europe. Russia's seeking to bring Ukraine back into the fold. That's it. That's all they want. And they're winning. They're succeeding on their timeline. Everybody who is frustrated by Putin is operating on a timeline that's independent of Russian reality. It's Belgian timeline, or it's a Washington, D.C. timeline. So there's that. But now we come back to the essence of your question about the Tomahawk. First of all, let's go to Val Dye. Again, one of the the sources of the angst and anxiety on people like Phil Doctorow, Doctorow and others. Putin said of the Tomahawk a couple things. One, he said, it's an old system, been around for a while. We're familiar with it. We could shoot it down. It's not going to change the battlefield reality at all. We got this. But if America uses this, it fundamentally changed the relationship between the United States and Russia. At a time when there's a light at the end of the tunnel, it will basically close down that tunnel. So he's realistic about it. He understands the relationship between that and, for instance, the potential of ongoing talks, strategic arms reduction talks. The New START treaty expires, but Putin's offered a 1-year moratorium on that. And basically, if the United States goes forward with the Tomahawk system, that shuts that down. But you don't see any panic on the part of Russians because, read his statement. Russia's very comfortable where they stand today in terms of their strategic nuclear deterrent. Modern weaponry that can defeat any air defense system out there, weaponry that gives Russia a tremendous amount of flexibility and capability. They're not worried. Would they like to have an arms control regime? Sure. If the United States wants it, they'll go for it. But if they don't, Russia's comfortable where they are. So there's no panic on the part of Putin. Now, the other thing is the Russians understand that you can't just accept at face value the idea that Donald Trump snaps his finger and tomorrow Tomahawks show up in Ukraine. It's not that easy. First of all, Trump has articulated a framework where Tomahawks could be provided. That framework is via a NATO member state. That the United States would not directly provide Tomahawks to Ukraine, but these Tomahawks would be provided to Ukraine by a NATO intermediary. So, geez, that sort of limits the pool of impossibilities. One NATO member today possesses Tomahawk capability. That's Great Britain. Great Britain ain't giving up any of their Tomahawks. These are systems that are linked to British submarines, and they're also tied to American-British understandings about, access to satellites that are used to guide the Tomahawks, access to encryption that are, it's used to facilitate the communications necessary to guide the Tomahawk. There's another nation, the Dutch. The Dutch, I think 2018 expected into 2023 began testing, and just earlier this year, April 2025, they actually tested a Tomahawk off of one of their frigates, and they've concluded a contract for the procurement of several hundred Tomahawk missiles. Delivery begins in 2028. Delivery begins in 2028. So if the Tomahawk's going to be provided to a NATO member, and then the NATO member is going to provide it to Ukraine, unless we accelerate this delivery, 2028 is the soonest the Dutch will get it. And then I guess if they transfer immediately to Ukraine, Ukraine will get it. The last time I checked the calendar, it's 2025. And the last time I checked the body count on the battlefield, Ukraine ain't going to be around in 2028, given the current rate of attrition. So right off the bat, we have a problem there. The other thing is the Tomahawk, it's not a miracle weapon. I'm very familiar with the Tomahawk. During the Gulf War, we used Tomahawks all over the place. I was an INF inspector. Part of the downstairs in my basement, I've got the fin of a ground-launched Tomahawk that was eliminated as part of the INF treaty. It was considered to be an extremely destabilizing weapon back in 1987 when the treaty was signed, and we got rid of them all. And I have the remnants of a Tomahawk that was cut up as part of the treaty. During the Gulf War, we used air-launched Tomahawks against the Iraqis. We used sea-launched Tomahawks against the Iraqis. I've signed many documents in my life, non-disclosure agreements, etc. And there's one number that still we're not allowed to talk about, even though the war was over 30 years ago. And that number is how many of the Tomahawks hit their targets. Now you can put 2 and 2 together and probably understand why. Because if it was 100% rate, we'd be like, "Oh my God, the Tomahawk was 100% rate." It wasn't, and there's a reason why they don't want you to know what it was. Because Tomahawk ain't that good. It just ain't that good, and it gets worse over time because as we use it, people learn how to track it, shoot it down. You know, we used the Tomahawk against Syria on a number of occasions, and it was jammed. They missed their targets. Several of them, again. Think about it. Several of them just went into the fields undamaged and were picked up by the Syrians and transferred to the Russians. These are the advanced Block 4s. So the Russians have them intact, everything about them. And the Russians have taken them apart, looked at them, and they're not panicked at all. Tomahawk just doesn't work. 35 were fired against Isfahan in the American go-around. Last time I checked, Isfahan's still standing. You know, you would need a whole bunch of Tomahawks to take out an industrial facility. We fired dozens of them against Taji during the Gulf War. And I inspected Taji many times as an inspector. It's still standing. Yeah, there's some damage, but they didn't shut it down, and they certainly didn't destroy everything in Taji worth destroying. So the idea that Ukraine is going to get a handful of Tomahawks and suddenly radically alter the course of the war is just a pipe dream, straight up pipe dream. The Tomahawk is not a game changer. First of all, the vast majority of the Tomahawks that will be fired will be shot down. Those that aren't shot down, many of them will malfunction and not reach their targets. And those that do reach their targets, they're not going to do that much damage. So this miracle weapon isn't a miracle weapon at all. And the Russians know this. And so Putin isn't panicking. Now, what did Dr. O want Putin to do? Get up there and turn pale? Say, "Oh my God, Tomahawks. If you do this, it will be the end of the world. We will do this, that, and the other thing." And now you've gotten into Putin's head. The reason why Russia's winning the war is you don't get into Putin's head. Putin, you know, knows that he's comfortable with what he's doing. He's not going to overreact. But the other thing, and this again is where Dr. O's statements are extraordinarily dangerous. People think Russia's bluffing. This is the big thing. Because Russia hasn't overreacted, because Russia has just decided they're going to win the war, not play NATO's game, that they're not going to take the bait every time bait is thrown out there. And the Tomahawks are bait. They're bait designed to trigger a reaction on the part of the Russians. And Putin's not taking the bait. But this is perceived by people who don't understand the Russian reality as weakness. And unfortunately, people surrounding Trump are like, "Nah, don't worry about it. The Russians are bluffing." The same advice given to Biden, by the way, the Russians are bluffing. Well, the Russians aren't bluffing. I mean, eventually a red line will be crossed that requires Russia to do something. But until that red line is crossed, why is Russia's winning this war? Why does Russia need to do anything to alter this course? That's what the West wants. They want Russia to deviate from the path towards victory that Russia is currently on. Because right now the path toward victory only leads to Russian victory. We want to kick them off that path. And the Tomahawk, issue is designed to do just that. It's not a game changer. It's not going to win the war for Ukraine. But what it could do is lead to a series of miscalculations that end up having the United States and Russia in a nuclear war. Because I want to remind people that the Russian nuclear doctrine specifically states that when a nuclear power enables a non-nuclear power to attack Russia, Russia will treat the attack as if it came from the nuclear power. And if the United States provides Ukraine with Tomahawk ground attack missiles, which are nuclear capable, there's no prediction what Russia will do. But there is the potential that Russia will treat it as a nuclear attack from a nuclear power.
Do you think that let's put it this way, we've learned from Keith Kellogg that he said that senior officials in Washington told him that Russia can't win the war. And then he came with his new ideas on how to go ahead and talk with Russians with some sort of leverage. But who are these officials? Who's providing them with this information? Do we know anything about it? Do we know if Tulsi Gabbard, I don't know who's receiving, if Tulsi Gabbard has some sort of role in the whole situation, because we were so much optimistic about Tulsi Gabbard and these people that may change the administration, that may cause some sort of, that may produce some sort of sanity within the administration in Washington.
Well, we know this, that when Keith Kellogg was appointed as special envoy, he was given a staff, and that people were chopped to his support staff from the CIA, DIA, NSA, State Department, and things of that nature. And every single one of those organizations I just named are thoroughly infected with Russophobia and are populated by Russophobes. The CIA especially has long ago lost any ability to think objectively about Russia. We see this in the reality that, for instance, the senior CIA official who briefed Donald Trump on the eve of the Alaska summit was a former national intelligence officer named Julia Gaganis. In 2016, she was the national intelligence officer for Russia and Eurasian affairs, who oversaw the production of the intelligence community assessment that manufactured a case that Vladimir Putin was tipping the scales of the 2016 election in favor of Donald Trump. She is a Russophobe. She knows nothing of Russia. Read her writings; they're as ignorant as the day is long. She views Putin as an autocrat. She doesn't understand Russian democracy. She doesn't understand Russia at all because her mind is infected, and she's surrounded by people. I mean, Fiona Hill, Andrea Kendall Taylor, another deputy national intelligence officer. We can go down the list of names. They're all infected, but she's the one briefing. These are the people advising Keith Kellogg. So now we know who the officials are. These are people linked to these agencies who are providing advice officially to Keith Kellogg in an effort to shape his worldview. But they didn't need to, because Keith Kellogg himself is a Russophobe. What little he knows about Russia is just dead wrong. You can go back and read things that he published before Donald Trump became president about Ukraine. You realize that factually everything he says is wrong. And when you go to the few times when he cites a source and you look at the source, you realize that the source itself either correctly from Ukraine or from a source heavily influenced by Ukraine. Keith Kellogg is a Ukrainian asset. Hell, the man was just given a senior medal by Volodymyr Zelensky. I mean, he literally works on behalf of Ukraine. And so you have a man who works on behalf of Ukraine, decorated by the Ukrainian president, receiving information from, Russophobic pro-Ukrainian elements inside the U.S. government. And you wonder why he says what he says. Donald Trump operates under the notion of peace through strength. But that means you have to appear to be strong. And when it comes to what's going on in Ukraine, right, there's no strength there. I mean, first of all, what Ukraine needs more than anything isn't Tomahawk missiles. They need Patriot missiles. But I mean, the reports are coming out. The Russians broken the code on that. I mean, right now the Patriot enjoys a 6% success rate. 6% success rate. That's nothing. And there's not enough Patriot missiles, not enough Patriot systems. The United States isn't going to give it to them directly. Europe has to buy them and then procure them and then transfer them. Oh, that's good. Except the United States has said we're not selling anything because we have to up our stocks. We got this potential conflict with China. We don't have any missiles in the Pacific. We got to build up our stockpile. Israel might go to war hook and jab with Iran again. We got to get a whole bunch of missiles lined up there. And then there's, of course, us. If this thing does go hot with Russia, we need our missiles. So there's no missiles available for the Ukraine. And that's the one thing they need, and they can't get it. So I think anybody who is focusing on what Trump says and not what Trump does is focused on the wrong thing.
Does Europe possess indigenous defense systems or anything that could be able to defend Europe if they decide to escalate with Russia?
Europe has, the French and the British have a limited nuclear deterrent capability. But then we're talking nuclear war, and then Europe just ceases to exist. Conventionally, let's just be real here for a second. I mean, really, people just got to put on their thinking caps. The Ukrainians have an army that is between 700 and 900,000 strong, depending on how many men they can thump on the head every day. But it's getting smaller. But it's still biggest army in Europe. The Russians, have 780,000 troops deployed into the special military operation. They're trying to expand their overall military about 1.5 million. But they're heavily committed to the special military operation. If you've got 750,000 troops engaged with 800,000 troops on a line of contact, that defines Eastern Ukraine, and you're talking about a war between Russia and Poland or Russia and the Baltics, just draw that arc up there. Figure out how many troops that would require on both sides. Now, NATO will it's almost impossible to imagine NATO, mobilizing 700,000 troops to defend that arc. They're not going to. But it's equally impossible to imagine Russia coming up with 708,000 troops to carry out offensive operations in that area as well. I mean, this is just stupidity in the extreme. Russia can defend itself and carry out focused operations if it need to. Taking out the Baltic states isn't going to be that hard. But Russia doesn't want to do this. Russia's not inclined to do this. But NATO has no ability whatsoever to meaningfully confront Russia. NATO can't carry out offensive operations. They simply don't have the troops to do that. Chris Donahue, the general, the commander who, got up there a little while ago and talked about, taking out Kaliningrad. We could do this in a very short period of time, he said. And no, you can't, General. Simply, you can't. I wish I was there. And when I said, simply, with what troops? They're surrounded by NATO. Well, actually, they're surrounded by the Baltic states and then part of Poland. But if you count the troops that are deployed there's not sufficient troops there to do anything to Kaliningrad. You're going to come in with air power and bomb them and all that. Then the problem is, Kaliningrad doesn't exist in a vacuum. It doesn't exist in isolation. It is part of the Russian Federation. And I will give General Donahue about an hour's life expectancy from the time NATO forces begin to attack Kaliningrad, because it will be a general war with Russia. And one of the first places Russia will take out is the command post where General Donahue is located. They'll kill him. They'll kill all of NATO's commanders. That's just the awful reality of war. And this is the point. NATO can't see. NATO's not a third sister. Russia's not inviting them back into the fold. They're not sitting there going, we're just going ahead and take your temper tantrum here because eventually you'll calm down and come home and we'll welcome back in. NATO is the bad nephew that Russia's going to put a bullet in the head, the rabid dog. If NATO wants to behave like a rabid dog, then they'll be treated like a rabid dog. Russia is Atticus Finch to the rabid dog of To Kill a Mockingbird, and they'll shoot him down in the street. So this is just crap. NATO has no conventional military capability whatsoever that can meaningfully threaten Russia. They have some air power. They have modern aircraft. But I mean, look at the way they surge their air power, and ask yourself why, when the Germans reinforce Poland, they send 2 fighters. Why? Because they're not an expeditionary air force. They can't send 2 squadrons because they don't know how to deploy 2 squadrons out of a base. They operate out of fixed bases with fixed support systems that are not expeditionary in nature. If you're going to take 2 aircraft and deploy them to a foreign airfield, you have to bring support, and they don't have enough to do that. I forget, the Dutch fly a couple airplanes. Somebody deployed 3, maybe the Brits, 3 airplanes. Wow, all 3 of them. I mean, amazing that they got 3 airplanes to take off in Great Britain. But the point is, NATO is not an expeditionary air power. Only America is. Only America can do this. And we're walking away. We're washing our hands of this. So, no, there's nothing NATO has that gives Russia indigestion.